Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we have just finished reading the first paragraph of the Shema, and it now continues. This is going on with Moses' discourse in general, commenting about when the Jewish people or the Israelites actually enter the land of Israel. So, V'haya, and it shall be, ki yeviacha Hashem Elokecha el haaretz, when the Lord your God brings you to the land, asher nishba la'avotecha, which he swore to your ancestors, your forefathers, la'Avraham, li'Yitzchak, u'le'Yakov, to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, latet lach, to give to you, right? Remember, he swore to them that he would give their descendants this land, that they were simply, in which they were sojourners. Arim Gedolot, large cities, Vetovot, and beautiful, good, Asher Lo Vanita, which you yourselves didn't build. You didn't create these things, right? They're being given to you. Uvatim le'im kol tuv, and houses filled with all kinds of good things, asher lo mileta, which you didn't fill, you didn't put all these good things in these homes. Uvorot chatzuvim, and hewn out cisterns, asher lo chatzavta, which you didn't hew out. Kramim v'zeitim, vineyards and olive trees, olive groves, asher lo natata, which you didn't plant, v'achalta v'savata, and you eat and be satisfied. And I think one of the messages that is in here is that we actually come into a world where so much has been done to make us comfortable that was developed and invented, etc., by others. And we are the beneficiaries of centuries, if not millennia, of human effort to get us to where we are right now. And we didn't do these things ourselves. And so I think what the note that's being struck here, which I believe is the foundation of, I heard this from another rabbi, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he said the essence of spirituality is appreciation. And that's clearly the note that Moses is trying to strike here, that we need to learn how to understand so much for which we need to be appreciative. So let's take a look. All right, and we know where he's going to head here, because this is human nature, and we see it. We see it in our own times. It is such an elemental part of this attitude of entitlement that we tend to adopt so much. Chatzuvim, he's taking this word chatzuvim, right? Lefi shehayu makom trashim, or trasim, it could be, okay? It could be trashim. He says, because the place they were in was rugged ground. So in other words, to dig these, what he's doing, what Rashi's trying to point out, is that this word chatzuvim is being used here in the text to indicate the difficulty with which these wells were being bored out. Trashim, rugged ground, uslaim, and rocks, nofel bo lashon chatziva, and for this reason, this term that means to hew out, in other words, to carve out, it wasn't a matter just of digging in the ground. It was a matter of having to actually carve out of the stone and the rough edges, the rough places, in order to get the water. So that's what Rashi's pointing out. So again, the Torah giving us a sense of the difficulties that the people who made these things possible encountered. V'achalta v'savata, and you eat and you are satisfied to a point of satisfaction. Hishamer lacha, be very careful. And he wouldn't be saying be very careful if we didn't need to be very careful. Because as I said, this is so much a natural human tendency. And again, this underscores what I've said, that the subtext of the Torah is doing what doesn't come naturally, right? So be very careful. Pen tishkach et Hashem, lest you forget about the Lord. Asher hotziacha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, mibeit avadim, from the house of slavery. So, Mi Beit Avadim, Rashi, Ketargumo. He says this is just the way Onkelos translates it into the Aramaic. Mi Beit Avduta, from the house of slavery. Mi Makom sheyitam sham avadim, from a place where you were slaves. So, whether or not we want to look at this in a literal kind of way, I certainly think that in terms of the story itself, we can definitely look at it in a literal kind of way. The question is, Moses is trying to speak to us. The point of Deuteronomy, I could say, is to try to speak to us in our own times. And so certainly there are people who were in very unfortunate circumstances and who were able to find a place. I like to understand the basic story of the Exodus and the enslavement as referring to various kinds of addictions that we can fall into. And we know that addictive behavior is terribly, terribly destructive. And we also know that part of getting out of trying to deal with that addiction is believing that there's a higher power that can help you get out of it. That to this day, we understand this. And so, regardless, in looking at whatever we enjoy ourselves, and in many cases, of course, I don't have to tell you, we don't even think about the things that we simply take for granted. My mother had a proverb that she taught me in Yiddish, which basically says, when is the beggar happy? When he discovers the thing he lost. So likewise, we take for granted these good things that our abilities are, whether it's our digestion, our health, our place where we live, our homes, everything, until we don't have them anymore. And once we lose them, then we realize how fortunate we were. So again, that's, I think, sort of the message here is to remember where we were and where we are now. Et Hashem Elokecha tira, you shall fear the Lord your God, va'oto ta'avod, and you shall serve him. So what is this business? I know so often throughout my rabbinate, people have objected to this term to fear God. But I think the idea is here, and I personally, of course, don't have a problem with this, because it has to do essentially with the recognition that there are consequences, that what it's really talking about is that we have to recognize that there are deep consequences to whatever choices we make, whether they're for good or for bad. And if we choose to make bad choices, the consequences are going to be awful. And we should be in fear of those sorts of things. So there's nothing like ignorance to make you feel secure. And that's not the kind of security you want to have, right? So to serve God, uvishmo tishavea, and in his name you shall swear. So Rashi here, uvishmo tishavea, im yesh becha kol hamidot halalu. So he's saying, in a way, he's saying that this is actually, the uvishmo tishavea is a consequence, we'll see, right? If you have all these qualities, she'ata yarei et shmo, that you fear God's name, ve'oved oto, and you serve him, az bishmo tishavea, as a consequence, you will swear in his name, shemitoch she'ata yarei et shmo, because in the fact that you fear his name, tehei zahir, you're going to be very careful, because you're going to recognize that when you swear in God's name, there are deep consequences for telling any lies or any falsehoods in that particular case, because you're God-fearing. Right? Tehei zahir, you're going to be very careful, bishvuatcha, in your oath, v'im lav lo tishava. And he says, and if you in fact don't fear God, and if you don't serve God, it would be better for you not to take any oaths. And being truthful in one's word, in making an oath in God's name, and taking an oath and making a false oath is considered to be very, very, very serious. And in fact, there's a statement in the tradition that says that the world trembled when the commandment not to make a false oath was given, that the whole world trembled. And I think the understanding is that sadly, because people think words don't matter that much, that people will lie even under oath. And of course, the world depends on trust. Being able to maintain the world itself depends on being able to trust processes over which we have little or no control. The degree of, and the fact that these days one has to be so untrustful is terrible, terrible. Going in. Lo telechun, you shall not follow, you shall not go, acharei Elohim acherim, after other gods, melohei ha'amim, of the gods of the people, ashish svivotechem, which surround you. Now, the question is, I'm trying to think of the scholar who makes this point, and it may come back to me. But sometimes the way it's stated in the Torah, it sounds more like fetishism than it is idolatry. And the difference between fetishism and idolatry is fetishism is believing that something that's inanimate actually has powers. On the other hand, idolatry is the notion of worshiping ideas and values that are not part of the tradition of our patriarchs. And the whole idea of what we mean by worship or serving gods has to do with what we want, what we believe, what we mean when we say something is a god. So if you consider, let's take a very typical example of idolatry, which would be worshiping money. Money becomes an idol when you believe that acquiring money will give you power, will give you success, will give you joy, etc., etc. And serving money means you'll do anything to acquire that money, including, of course, cheating or stealing, etc. And that is idolatry. That's the sense in which that story of the golden calf speaks to us even now. Because, of course, sometimes people don't recognize that they are worshiping something. But power is something that can be worshipped. Beauty is something that could be worshipped, etc., etc. Anything that you consider to be an ultimate source of your success and power, etc., or joy is possibly an object of worship, and the way in which you acquire that is the issue. That's the practice of idolatry. So in worshiping the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we see that God requires us to act in compassionate, kind, and just ways. We have to apply kindness and justice and honesty and all those kinds of things in order to say that we worship God, Elohim. So, um, Rashi, Me'elohe ha'amim asher svivotechem, of the gods of the peoples who are around you. V'hu hadin lerechokim, all the more so. In other words, certainly you shouldn't worship those who are around you, but even more the ones that are distant, the people that are distant. Elalafi she'ata ro'eh et svivotecha. In other words, even though it says the ones around you, doesn't suggest then that the ones that are far away from you, those gods are okay, right? No, it means what the Torah is saying, even the more so the others, right? However, why does the Torah put it this way? That's the question that then is begged, right? So because you see et svivotecha, right? You see your surroundings, to'im acharehim. It's more likely for you to make a mistake in following them. And for that reason, Torah had to warn more about the nations that were closer and their idolatrous practices. Ki el kaneh Hashem Elokecha bekirbecha, for the Lord your God is a jealous God in your midst. Pen yechere af Hashem Elokecha bach, lest the anger of the Lord be inflamed against you, vehishmicha, and destroy you, me'al pnei hadama, from off the face of the earth. So this is a very severe warning. And what do we mean by God being jealous? The jealousy that we're talking about is not sort of typical of human jealousy, but we're talking about the fact that to the degree to which the worship of other gods, the practice of idolatry, is such a terrible, it's such a terrible betrayal on all kinds of levels. And if you yourself have ever been betrayed by someone, you know what an awful, awful experience that is. And that's what this is trying to describe. That's what this verse is trying to tell us. Again, why does it need to tell us? Because we might not think it's that significant. It's precisely because we don't think it's that significant and we're not careful about these things that we aren't more concerned about the behavior that we have. So this is what Moses is trying to warn the Jewish people. As I said, this is Moses's ethical will to the Jewish people and wanting them so much to thrive and survive and be able to have lives that are filled with happiness and knowing the kinds of mistakes people can make in the choices that they make and hurt themselves as a result. Let's go on. See, yes. Okay. Let's stop here. It's a paragraph. So I want to give you a chance for any comments you might have. And we'll stop here. And God willing, tomorrow we'll continue with this particular section here. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and invite any comments that you might have. Yes, Harlan.
It seems to me that the Jewish people were stiff-necked. And what happens is every time they're stiff-necked, they get punished. That it seems to me on and on like that, no matter where they go. And
Well,
uh,
let's
and
say
they
that.
never learn. They never learn.
Well, I would never say never. I think there are many who do. And again, I think being stubborn is a natural thing. Again, I said earlier on that I'm an expert when it comes to everybody else's faults, and I would say that I have to look into my own stubbornness. And believe me, there are people who know me very well and who know the degree to which I've acted stubbornly in my life and possibly continue to act stubbornly. And the idea here is not to have now some kind of test, litmus test for the rest of the world, but rather for ourselves. We each have, and this is the point that was already made, that when you act in a righteous way, you bring salvation to the world. Nobody else has to recognize it. But the reason why God continues to tolerate the world for all its faults, etc., has to do with the fact that God really does love us and wants us to thrive. And the degree to each one of us realizing that we are, each one of us, extremely significant in this process. We're not better than anybody else. That's not the point. The point is we each have a responsibility. And if I'm correct that a religion is about finding significance, I cannot think of any greater significance. That this world is better off, hopefully, because you have crossed it. And it's a really very powerful motivation to try to be careful and to try to act with kindness and justice and compassion, etc. So I find these words inspirational and helpful and trying to set up the right kinds of expectations and the right kinds of hopes. Does anybody want to say anything else for the record before I turn off the recording? Okay. All right.